Welcome back to the channel, everyone. Today, we're diving deep into something that has fascinated humanity for thousands of years, the ancient knowledge that can elevate your mind power. What if I told you that long before modern neuroscience, before brain scans and cognitive psychology, ancient civilizations had already mapped the territory of human consciousness? What if the answers to unlocking your mental potential were hiding in plain sight all along? We live in a world obsessed with productivity hacks, brain training apps, and cognitive enhancement supplements. We're constantly seeking the newest, shiniest way to upgrade our minds. Yet ironically, some of the most powerful techniques for mental elevation have been available for millennia. Practices developed by ancient philosophers, spiritual teachers, and wisdom traditions when humans had nothing but their own minds to study. Before we begin this journey together, I want to acknowledge something important. This isn't about magical thinking or pseudoscience. What's fascinating is how modern neuroscience is now validating what ancient traditions discovered through introspection alone. The practices I'll share today aren't just philosophical concepts. They're practical tools that can literally rewire your brain, enhance your cognitive abilities, and transform your relationship with your own mind. Let's start by examining what we're actually trying to achieve. When we talk about mind power, what do we really mean? In our culture, we often reduce this concept to productivity, memory retention, or processing speed, treating our brains like biological computers that just need optimization. But the ancients had a much more profound understanding. They weren't just interested in making minds more efficient. They were focused on making minds more aware, more present, more at peace, and ultimately, more aligned with deeper truths. The conventional narrative tells us that mental power comes from accumulating more information, multitasking better, and pushing our brains to their limits. But what if that approach is fundamentally flawed? What if true mental power comes not from constantly adding more, but from strategic subtraction, learning to quiet the mental noise that clouds our perception and drains our mental energy? Our journey begins in ancient Greece with the Stoics. Figures like Marcus Aurelius, Seneca, and Epictetus developed powerful mental disciplines that remain astonishingly relevant today. The Stoics understood something fundamental about mind power. It's not external events that determine our mental state, but our interpretation of those events. Consider this passage from Marcus Aurelius' Meditations. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. This insight forms the foundation of what modern psychology calls cognitive reframing, the ability to consciously shift our perspective on situations to reduce suffering and increase effectiveness. The Stoics practiced proactive mental exercises like premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of evils, where they would vividly imagine worst-case scenarios. This wasn't pessimism, it was a form of mental inoculation. By confronting potential difficulties in advance, they reduced anxiety and prepared their minds to remain calm regardless of circumstances. Modern research on visualization and mental rehearsal confirms the neurological benefits of this approach. But the Stoics were just one tradition among many. If we travel eastward to ancient India, we encounter the rich traditions of Vedanta and Buddhism, which developed perhaps the most sophisticated maps of consciousness ever created. Buddhist meditation practices, dating back over 2,500 years, weren't designed as stress reduction techniques for busy professionals, though they certainly help with that. They were comprehensive systems for training attention, developing meta-awareness, and ultimately transcending the limitations of conventional thinking. The Buddha taught that our ordinary cognitive patterns create suffering. When we observe our own minds with enough clarity and consistency, we begin to notice how thoughts arise and pass away like clouds in the sky. They are not solid, permanent entities, and we are not obligated to believe them or identify with them. This insight alone has revolutionary implications for mental power. Most people are completely identified with their thoughts, letting their internal monologue determine their emotional state and behavior. But what if you could create space between yourself and your thoughts? What if you could observe them without being controlled by them? Scene transition, time-lapse of sunrise, flowing water, clouds moving. Let's examine one of the most fundamental Buddhist meditation practices, mindfulness of breathing. It sounds absurdly simple, just pay attention to your breath. Yet neuroscience research shows this practice literally rebuilds your brain. Regular meditators show increased grey matter in regions associated with attention, emotional regulation, and self-awareness. They demonstrate enhanced connectivity between brain regions and improved ability to disengage from distracting thoughts. But here's what's most interesting. The Buddha wasn't trying to optimize brain function as we understand it today. He was addressing a deeper problem, our tendency to live on autopilot, lost in thought, disconnected from direct experience. The enhanced cognitive abilities were secondary benefits of a more fundamental shift in relationship to consciousness itself. Imagine for a moment what your life would be like if you could choose where to direct your attention rather than having it constantly hijacked by whatever thought, emotion, or distraction arises. This capacity, what the ancients called mental sovereignty, is perhaps the most fundamental form of mind power. Now let's travel to ancient China, where Taoist sages developed their own approaches to cultivating the mind. The Taoists observed that forcing and straining actually diminishes mental power. They developed the concept of Wu Wei, often translated as non-doing or effortless action. This wasn't about being passive, but about aligning with natural principles rather than struggling against them. A key Taoist metaphor is water. It flows around obstacles rather than battling them directly. It can be gentle enough to nourish or powerful enough to carve through mountains. It maintains perfect equilibrium by always seeking the lowest point. Applied to the mind, these principles suggest that optimal mental functioning comes not from forcing concentration, but from removing the obstacles to our natural state of awareness. The Taoists practiced forms of moving meditation like Qigong and Tai Chi that cultivated a relaxed yet alert mental state, what modern psychology might call flow. These traditions weren't operating in isolation. The ancient world had more cross-cultural exchange than we often imagine. Philosophical ideas traveled the Silk Road alongside spices and textiles. Greek philosophers journeyed to India after Alexander's campaigns. The wisdom traditions influenced and refined each other over centuries. What emerges when we look at these diverse approaches is a surprisingly consistent understanding of mental potential. Across cultures, the ancients recognized that ordinary consciousness, the default mode of thinking, represents just the surface level of what the mind is capable of. Through disciplined practice, humans could access deeper levels of awareness, enhanced cognitive abilities, and profound insights unavailable to the untrained mind. But here's where we need to pause and acknowledge something important. In our modern context, ancient wisdom often gets reduced to productivity tips or stress management techniques. We want the benefits without the philosophical frameworks or ethical foundations that gave these practices their power. We want the fruits without cultivating the roots. The ancient traditions understood that mind power wasn't just about enhancing individual cognitive abilities. It was about situating the individual mind within a larger context of meaning, ethics, and purpose. Mental training wasn't separate from questions about how to live a good life or how to contribute to the well-being of others. This integration is what's often missing in modern approaches to cognitive enhancement. We chase mental performance metrics without asking the deeper questions. Performance for what? In service of what values? Toward what ends? Now let's examine how these ancient approaches might apply to our modern context. We're facing unprecedented challenges to mental well-being and cognitive function. Our attention is under constant assault from digital technologies designed to capture and monetize it. We're expected to process more information in a day than our ancestors encountered in a lifetime. Rates of anxiety, depression, and burnout are skyrocketing. This makes ancient wisdom not just interesting, but urgently relevant. The mental training systems developed thousands of years ago were specifically designed to help humans gain sovereignty over their own minds. Exactly what we need in an age of continuous distraction and information overload. Let's look at some specific practices from different traditions and how modern science validates their effects on the brain and cognitive function. First, contemplative practices like meditation. Researchers at Harvard found that just 8 weeks of mindfulness meditation produced measurable changes in brain regions associated with memory, self-awareness, and perspective-taking. Participants showed growth in the prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for executive function and decision-making, and reduction in the amygdala, which processes fear and stress. When Buddhist monks with tens of thousands of hours of meditation experience have their brains scanned, researchers find extraordinary levels of gamma wave activity associated with peak cognitive performance and heightened awareness. Their brains show remarkable synchronization between different regions, suggesting a level of neural integration far beyond the average person. Ancient breathing techniques from yogic traditions like pranayama have been shown to activate the parasympathetic nervous system, reducing stress hormones and increasing alpha brainwaves associated with relaxed alertness. These practices aren't just relaxation techniques, they're precise tools for shifting the entire functioning of the nervous system and, by extension, the quality of consciousness itself. Here's a simple practice from the yogic tradition called Nadi Shodhana, or alternate nostril breathing. You close your right nostril with your thumb, inhale through the left nostril, then close the left nostril with your ring finger, release the thumb, and exhale through the right nostril. Then inhale through the right, close it, and exhale through the left. This creates a cycle that balances the two hemispheres of the brain and induces a state of calm alertness. Research shows this simple technique increases oxygen saturation in the blood, reduces heart rate and blood pressure, and improves cognitive function. Ancient yogis described it as balancing the Ida and Pingala, subtle energy channels, but we can understand it today in terms of autonomic nervous system regulation and enhanced brain oxygenation. Now let's turn to Stoic cognitive practices. The Stoics understood something fundamental about the relationship between thoughts, emotions, and behavior. Their practice of prosoche, focused attention, involved constantly monitoring one's own judgments and assumptions. They recognized that automatic thoughts create automatic emotions and behaviors, but by bringing awareness to these processes, we gain the power to intervene. Modern cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, one of the most evidence-based therapeutic approaches, operates on essentially the same principles. The Stoic exercise of distinguishing between what is and isn't under our control maps perfectly onto the circle of influence concept in contemporary psychology. Let's try a modern adaptation of a Stoic exercise. Think of something that's been causing you stress lately. Now draw 2 circles in your mind. In the inner circle, place everything about this situation that's under your direct control. In the outer circle, place everything that isn't. The Stoics taught that mental freedom comes from focusing our energy exclusively on the inner circle and practicing acceptance of the outer circle. This simple cognitive reframing has profound implications. When we stop trying to control the uncontrollable, we reclaim enormous amounts of mental energy that can be redirected toward constructive action. Studies show that this kind of cognitive restructuring reduces anxiety and increases resilience in the face of challenges. The ancient Taoist concept of Wu Wei, or effortless action, finds its modern counterpart in the psychological state of flow, extensively researched by Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. In flow states, people report a sense of effortless concentration, intrinsic motivation, and optimal performance, exactly what the Taoists described centuries earlier. What's fascinating is that modern neuroscience confirms the brain functions differently during flow states. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for self-consciousness, becomes less active, while neural networks associated with attention and implicit learning become more synchronized. This reflects the Taoist insight that our self-conscious striving often interferes with optimal performance. These ancient traditions also recognized something profound about the role of the physical body in mental function. Long before modern science confirmed the brain-body connection, ancient practitioners understood that posture, movement, breathing, and diet directly impact cognitive abilities. Yogic practices deliberately used physical postures, asanas, to prepare the body for meditation. The specific alignment of the spine, the rhythm of the breath, and the engagement of specific muscle groups weren't arbitrary. They were designed to optimize the physiological conditions for heightened awareness. Modern research confirms these insights. Studies show that specific postures affect hormone production, with power poses increasing testosterone and reducing cortisol. Simple breathing techniques can alter brainwave patterns within minutes. Physical movement enhances cognitive function by increasing BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which promotes neural growth and plasticity. So far, we've examined how ancient practices enhance what we might call the hardware of cognition: attention, focus, emotional regulation, and physiological balance. But the ancients were equally concerned with upgrading the software, the conceptual frameworks and mental models we use to interpret experience. This is where philosophical contemplation enters the picture. Traditions like Vedanta, Buddhism, and Stoicism weren't just collections of techniques, they were comprehensive frameworks for understanding the nature of mind, reality, and human experience. They recognized that how we conceptualize these fundamental aspects of existence profoundly impacts our cognitive functioning. Consider the Buddhist concept of dependent origination, the understanding that all phenomena arise in dependence on multiple causes and conditions. When internalized, this view naturally counters our tendency towards simplistic thinking, helps us appreciate complexity, and enhances our ability to see interconnections, all valuable cognitive skills in a complex world. Similarly, the Stoic practice of viewing events from a cosmic perspective, what they called the view from above, helps overcome cognitive biases like catastrophizing and emotional reactivity. By mentally zooming out to see our concerns within the vast context of space and time, we gain cognitive distance and perspective. These philosophical frameworks weren't just abstract theories, they were practical tools for restructuring perception itself. They recognize that the lens through which we view reality determines what we're capable of perceiving and understanding. Let's synthesize these diverse approaches into practical strategies for enhancing mind power in our modern context. First, attention training. The ancients understood that attention is the foundation of all higher cognitive abilities. Without the capacity to direct and sustain attention, other mental skills remain inaccessible. Regular meditation practice, even just 10 to 15 minutes daily, builds this fundamental capacity. Research suggests that the optimal approach combines focused attention practices, concentrating on a single object like the breath, with open monitoring, observing whatever arises in awareness without attachment. Second, cognitive reframing. Both Stoic and Buddhist traditions emphasized the power of perspective. By consciously examining our automatic interpretations of events and choosing alternative viewpoints, we free ourselves from limiting mental patterns. A practical approach is to regularly ask, what's another way to see this situation? Or what would this look like from the perspective of different stakeholders? Third, embodied cognition. The ancients knew the mind doesn't exist in isolation from the body. Regular movement practices, whether yoga, tai chi, qigong, or simply mindful walking, enhance cognitive function by optimizing the physiological basis of mental activity. Even simple breathing exercises practiced throughout the day can regulate the nervous system and improve mental clarity. Fourth, philosophical contemplation. Regularly engaging with profound questions about the nature of mind, reality, and human experience expands our conceptual frameworks and enhances cognitive flexibility. This doesn't require adopting any particular philosophical system wholesale. It's about the process of deep inquiry itself. Questions like, what am I taking for granted here? Or what larger systems is this situation part of? Activate deeper modes of cognition. Fifth, ethical development. Across traditions, the ancients recognized that ethical conduct creates the conditions for mental clarity. When our actions align with our values, we avoid the cognitive dissonance and psychological fragmentation that drain mental energy. Regular self-examination of our motivations and the consequences of our actions builds integrity, which in turn supports cognitive integration. Scene transition. People practicing these approaches in modern settings. Now let's address some potential objections or concerns. You might be thinking, these practices sound time-consuming. I'm already overloaded. How am I supposed to add more to my schedule? This is where it's important to distinguish between time spent and value received. The ancient traditions weren't designed for people with unlimited leisure time. Many of these practices were developed by individuals with significant responsibilities, from Roman emperors like Marcus Aurelius to householders in ancient India. The key insight is that even brief periods of focused practice yield disproportionate returns. A few minutes of meditation or breath work, practiced consistently, can fundamentally alter your relationship with your own mind. Many of these approaches can be integrated into existing activities, bringing mindful awareness to your morning coffee, practicing cognitive reframing during your commute, or doing brief breathing exercises between meetings. Another concern might be, isn't this all rather individualistic? We're facing collective challenges that require systemic solutions, not just personal transformation. This is a valid point, but it creates a false dichotomy between individual and collective change. The ancients understood that transformed individuals create transformed communities. When we develop greater awareness, emotional regulation, and cognitive flexibility, we become more effective agents of change in whatever systems we're part of. Moreover, many of these traditions explicitly included practices for cultivating compassion, ethical discernment, and concern for the common good. They weren't about escaping the world, but engaging with it more skillfully. Scene transition, community of practitioners supporting each other. As we move toward concluding our exploration, I want to emphasize something crucial. The journey of mental development isn't linear. It's not about reaching some perfect state of cognitive function and then being done. It's an ongoing process of discovery, refinement, and deepening. The ancient traditions understood this. They spoke of stages of development, plateaus, challenges, and breakthroughs. They recognized that the path isn't always smooth, that we encounter resistance, regression, and periods where progress seems elusive. This is why community support and guidance from experienced practitioners were considered essential. In our modern context, we can create these supportive conditions through practice groups, learning communities, or working with qualified teachers. The journey is both deeply personal and inherently communal. We learn from each other's insights and challenges. As we integrate these ancient approaches into our lives, something remarkable begins to happen. We start to recognize that what we've been calling mind power isn't just about performing better or processing information more efficiently. It's about a fundamental shift in our relationship with consciousness itself. We begin to discover that awareness isn't just a tool we use, it's what we fundamentally are. Beyond all the fluctuations of thought and emotion is a field of pure knowing, what some traditions called witness consciousness or primordial awareness. From this perspective, enhancing mind power isn't about adding something we lack, but uncovering what's already present beneath the noise of conditioned thinking. Let me share a personal story that illustrates this shift. Several years ago, I was going through an intensely stressful period, juggling multiple projects, facing tight deadlines, and dealing with some challenging personal situations. I was using every productivity technique I knew, but still feeling overwhelmed and mentally fragmented. During this time, I committed to a daily meditation practice, just 20 minutes each morning. At first, it seemed like one more thing on my already crowded to-do list. But after a few weeks, I noticed something surprising. I wasn't necessarily getting more done, but my relationship to everything I was doing had changed. Tasks that previously felt like burdens became opportunities for focused engagement. The mental chatter that had been consuming so much energy began to quiet. I found myself responding to challenges with greater clarity and less reactivity. Most importantly, I began to experience moments of presence and appreciation throughout the day that had previously been inaccessible. What I realized was that the ancient practices weren't just making me more efficient within my existing paradigm, they were shifting the paradigm itself. They were revealing a different way of experiencing life altogether. This is what the ancient traditions have been pointing to all along. The highest form of mind power isn't just enhanced cognitive performance within our conventional understanding of reality. It's the capacity to transcend limiting mental models and access expanded states of awareness that reveal dimensions of experience we hadn't previously recognized. Scene transition, montage of people engaged in various ancient practices in modern settings. As we bring our exploration to a close, I want to leave you with some practical next steps. If you're new to these approaches, start small. Choose one practice that resonates with you, perhaps a simple meditation technique, a stoic reflection exercise, or a breathing practice, and commit to exploring it for just a few minutes each day. Notice what changes, not just in terms of mental performance, but in your overall relationship with your experience. Pay attention to subtle shifts in how you perceive challenges, interact with others, and relate to your own thoughts and emotions. If you're already familiar with some of these practices, consider deepening your exploration by studying one tradition more thoroughly, or by integrating approaches from different traditions in a way that addresses your specific needs and circumstances. Remember that this journey isn't about reaching some idealized end state. It's about an ongoing exploration of human potential, one that has engaged the brightest minds across cultures for thousands of years. The ancient knowledge we've explored today isn't obsolete wisdom from a bygone era. It represents humanity's most sophisticated understanding of consciousness and its potentials, insights that modern science is only beginning to catch up with. By integrating these approaches into our lives, we're not just enhancing our individual cognitive abilities, we're participating in a profound exploration of what it means to be human. Thank you for joining me on this journey into ancient wisdom and mind power. If you found value in this exploration, please consider sharing it with others who might benefit. Leave a comment below with your own experiences or questions about these practices, and don't forget to subscribe for more content on personal development, consciousness, and human potential. Until next time, remember that the greatest power isn't something to be acquired from outside. It's the awareness that's been within you all along, waiting to be recognized and cultivated.